pretty jam-packed days of lots of hopefully interesting discussions. My name is Sunita. I manage the Innovation Fund at UNICEF, so just based across the street. And what we do is something very similar to a lot of the work you're going to hear about today. So we have quite an exciting panel lined up, but it's jam-packed. We have actually almost 12 speakers who are going to want to share their experiences with you today. So I hope that we'll hear a lot of variety and diversity of different experiences and what's worked and what hasn't. And what the topic is today is around nurturing entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystems for the SDGs. And as we know, we really have to find new ways of accelerating the results that we're trying to achieve, especially for the most marginalized. And so what we'll hear about today is from a variety of different stakeholders who have a role to play in nurturing innovation ecosystems, from policymakers to entrepreneurs themselves, to thought leaders, and also to colleagues from our governments and UN agencies. So what we're going to think about today and kind of hear about is the challenge of really integrating innovation and entrepreneurs into our efforts to bring new solutions to scale, and what that might take in individual contexts. And what we know, especially in a world where we're all operating with constrained resources, is that really what we need to try and do is add value. So build on what's already there, use the resources and the capacities and the skills that we find on the ground, and see how we can complement those and really accelerate those rather than necessarily creating things from scratch. So we'll hear from a number of initiatives today, and one of the ones that will be highlighted is Accelerate 2030, which is a program jointly initiated by the Impact Hub and UNDP and supported by ITC Switzerland, as well as many other partners, including private companies. And it's a global scaling program to identify ventures with tested and scale-ready solutions that can contribute towards the SDGs. And the program has to date already been implemented in 19 developing and emerging economies and supported more than 500 entrepreneurs globally. So you'll hear a little bit more about that program today as well. So the setup that we have is we have a few esteemed guests who are going to be making some opening and welcoming remarks. So I'll ask them to step up in a second. We then have a keynote speaker, and we'll follow up with some interventions from practitioners, so entrepreneurs and advocates who are doing some work around entrepreneurial ecosystems in different contexts. So to get us started, I would like to welcome the Minister for Foreign Trade and Development from Finland, Ms. Veera Lainen, and ask her to please make her remarks.
Thank you.
And feel free,
pronunciation.
feel free to take a seat if that's more comfortable.
I think you will hear me if I stand. If I sit, so yes. no one hears. And I think I have a message for you. At least I hope so. So, Your Excellencies, dear friends. So today's joint event by UNDP, International Trade Center, Impact Hub Network, Switzerland and Finland is an exciting opportunity to discuss social innovation and entrepreneurship as means for achieving the sustainable development goals. The agenda today highlights the role of innovation ecosystems in harnessing local innovation potential and generating solutions that advance the key Agenda 2030 principle of leaving no one behind. These topics are dear to Finland and also central to our development policy. The global challenges of our time, from climate change to inequality, they create a growing need for social innovation, especially in the developing world. We need solutions to pressing local problems, advancing human rights, social and economic inclusion, and creating decent jobs for all. Social entrepreneurship brings up solutions in sectors such as healthcare, education, financial services, and agriculture. Finland is commonly regarded as one of the world's most innovative countries. This has not happened overnight, but over decades, through our long-term investments in education, research, and innovation. Furthermore, it is based on our commitment to socio-economic and gender equality, as well as a long-standing culture of collaboration. We are famous for our social innovations, such as the Finnish maternity and child health clinic system, and the maternity package or baby box. These innovations were created already in the 1940s, and they have had and continue to have a key role in ensuring that all infants and mothers receive a high level of maternity and infant care. Our history of social innovation is as important as our technological know-how. Finland has also been one of the countries spearheading innovation in development cooperation. Our first bilateral program in the area started over 10 years ago. We place emphasis on building local capacities and collaboration for innovation. The UN is for us today a key innovation partner. The key question of social entrepreneurship is to create collaboration mechanisms for scaling innovations globally. Working towards deeper understanding and wider application of sustainable and inclusive business practices is also very essential. I would like to applaud Accelerate 2030 and the other co-organizers today for valuable work on these fronts. Finland is proud to host the world's first United Nations Technology Innovation Lab until Finland, which will form part of the larger network of labs aimed to harness the Finnish innovation ecosystem and the UN's global reach in creating scalable, high-impact technological solutions in the fields of health, education, peace and security, and circular economy. We want to see Until Finland as a truly global innovation platform. I would thus like to warmly invite partners here today to explore joint initiatives within the lab. Finally, thank you to UNDP for the opportunity to co-organize this inspiring event. I'm looking forward to the interesting and important agenda ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for making the time and for your support to Innovation of the UN. As our next speaker, we have UN Assistant Secretary General Mara Diaz, who will be speaking.
Thank you, Madam MC. Madam Minister, dear friends, innovators in this room. When I came in the room, I had a structured statement. But when I look at the title here, Nurturing Entrepreneurial and Innovation Ecosystems for the SDGs, I was suddenly visited by the spirit of Joe Schumpeter, whom you all know as the guru and the pope of innovation. And he told me, well, you may not deliver a statement, just think of me, what you have learned in my book, and deliver that. And that's the message I would like to share with you, which is Joe Schumpeter, the pope of innovation. And he was right. And in fact, we are trying to reimagine or reinvent development the way he designed it. He was right in saying that innovation is the currency of development. And we are learning it the hard way. Today, the high point of our discussion is how do we fund the SDGs? This some 6 billion or 5 to 7 billion gap that we are struggling to fund for years since we started this agenda. And we're not doing it. Yet, when you aggregate all the existing liquidity in the world, you get what? Some $300 trillion there. How come supply cannot meet demand? Yet we just have only a tiny gap, tiny, compared to the supply of $6 trillion. Something is maybe wrong in the system. We have always believed that financial intermediation, or rather development intermediation, to do development is the dollar, is funding. But it's not. I think what we have now, true, is a little bit of deficit of funding. I think it's a deficit of creativity and innovation. Had we learned the lessons of Schumpeter, had we used innovation as a currency of development, we could have done it. And I think the spirit of the meeting is to remind us what would that be. And it's critically important in the area we are now. Remember, the way we used to do policy is quite prescriptive. We come and design policies to implement. It was easy then, because then we could control the trends. Today, all trends are. Those of you who have studied the life cycle of trends would know that trends used to be linear, and they moved to logarithmic, and then exponential, and almost hyperbolic or just straight lines. Any trend you take, be it urbanization, aging, demographic, AI, you name them, they move, they are disruptive. Yet, our model of handling trends has been, in my view, stuck in static, because we still use the same institutions, we still use the same model. That for me is passé. That's why our new invention, Acceleration 2030, doing policy in a sui generis fashion is the way to go. Because the model we have in the past, as I say, and the institutions are completely obsolete. This is the way we are inventing development. We'll be setting up a series of acceleration labs based on collective intelligence, where together we can find the solutions. Let me give you 2 examples that and we have many, and you will see in the book that we share there in the back of the room, we call moonshots. Shots of innovations that drive solutions is the way forward. During the discussion we are having here since Monday, 2 did strike me. The first one is in Mali, which UNDP is really completely very active. Remember when the war struck in Mali and the country was divided into 2, we are all stuck in Bamako, in the capital. We don't know how to handle the north, yet we have a lot of projects going on. And then we use collective intelligence. We sat together. One of our colleagues told us, well, it's very simple. In the discussion, how do we deal with the northern part of Mali? And he said, well, if the mountain doesn't come to Mohammed, Mohammed has to go to the mountain. What do you mean? Well, it's very simple. You can't go to northern Somali, but if you go through the satellite, you can go to northern Somali. Then we've got UN OSA, the UN Office of Outer Space, and we then had a program that could, on real time, monitor exactly what we are doing on northern Mali while we sit in Bamako. Well, that's fantastic. Just sitting together, collective intelligence, we find the solution. Why don't we use drone and then they will bring the blood out there? You see, just discussion, bring creativity. And some countries go even beyond by using edible drones. When they deliver food in South Sudan, we send a drone there, just collapse, and then people eat the food. This creativity is the way we have to do business in the future. So my invitation to us is that let's reinvent the way of doing development, and we can do it by avoiding to be in the trap of being prescriptive. Just sitting together in this kind of labs, the creativity will come. So I would like to invite us to be pioneers in this new community of innovators. And thank you again, Madame, for giving us a lead. And I would like to invite you all to be in this journey. Thank you very much.
For putting that challenge to us. Next, I'd like to ask Ms. Arantxa Gonzalez, who's the Executive Director of the International Trade Center, a joint development agency of the UN and the World Trade Organization.
Thank you. Hello.
Are that if supply doesn't meet demand is because there are huge market imperfections.
That's true.
What we have to do is deal with these market imperfections. But let me first talk a little bit about the market, because this is a very important market. This market, from what we know, is a market where more than 40% entrepreneurs around the world are between the age of 18 to 35. Basically, the world of entrepreneurship is the world of young entrepreneurs. Second fact about this market, These young entrepreneurs are in the sectors of the economy that have the highest growth rates. So they are in the sectors of the economy that will lift the economies up. And these young entrepreneurs are more likely to engage young people in their businesses. So there's a bit of a virtuous circle if the objective that we have is to generate jobs for the group, jobs for the youth, which is, I think, we all agree, the cursor needs to be. Certainly, this is what I've heard from everyone that I've met during the General Assembly so far. Next fact is that when these young entrepreneurs are connected to international markets, they are 3 times more competitive than those that are not connecting to international markets. Meaning you stay within your own little protected domestic market, you're going to be less competitive. So there is another virtuous circle we can create around this word that has almost become a 4-letter word called international trade. So if I look at this market, where social entrepreneurship is gaining a space, meaning entrepreneurs understand that it's not just about generating wealth for themselves, but it's also about empowering through their businesses for many others. And this is the space which I call doing business, but also doing good. So you can see that in this market, we have the potential to build a huge virtuous circle if we deal with the market imperfections. Now, the biggest market imperfection, and this is applicable to this market as well as to many others, is that we do not think in ecosystem terms. We think in terms of silos. We have one button that we think we can push to fix the problem, or maybe 2 buttons, but it's not a question of buttons, it's creating the ecosystem. In this ecosystem, one of the fundamental ingredients is partnerships. And this is why for us in the International Trade Center, it's pretty simple. We collaborate with Accelerate 2030. We obviously collaborate with UNDP. We collaborate with actors on the ground. We collaborate with member states. And I promised the Finnish minister that I am going to go to visit this amazing UN lab that they've just opened. It's just about bringing together all these parts under some sort of structure so that we create the ecosystem where these young entrepreneurs can thrive. 2 very concrete examples. I want to follow Mar's steps. 2 young entrepreneurs, they are from Ghana, but this is just a coincidence. I say Ghana, it could be Afghanistan, it could be Colombia, it could be Sri Lanka, it could be Latvia, it could be anywhere in the world. One is Michael Okansi, Agro Center. He has invented a very simple platform together with a mobile solution that helps farmers in Ghana disintermediate, sell directly to the end buyer. Disintermediation means the smallholder gets more bang for the buck. This guy was the winner of our innovators last year. And he was so excited by that he decided to participate in the Seed Stars, the real competition, where he got $500,000 last year for his innovation. So this is what is happening on the ground. Just like Michael Okansi, this year we had another Ghanaian, Charles Ofori, Dex Technologies. He has invented a simpler method to entice the youth to go into STEM and to transfer skills in the STEM sector that, again, will be essential to make sure we don't repeat in the digital economy the divide we see in the analog economy. So all of this is happening, all of this is possible. Partnerships, ecosystems are the name of the game. In any event, I'm just here to tell you, I'm learning. I'm not very young anymore, but I'm very enthusiastic about what I see on the ground. I'm here to tell you that the International Trade Center will be your partner in this endeavor. Thanks, everyone.
So finally, at the last of our opening and welcoming remarks, Ambassador Sager, the General Director of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation.
Thank you very much. It's certainly nice to see such a full house. for this topic. In preparation for this presentation, I had tried to come up with some original thoughts on public-private partnerships for development, and I had to realize that it's difficult to have original thoughts. Certainly after 3 days of listening to speeches on how to cooperate better between the private sector and the public sector. For years now, we have tried to move private capital, particularly to countries, to fragile countries, to the poorest countries, and we have come to realize it's not that simple. And regulation doesn't work because we can't order businesses to invest. And exhortation, and then plus the regulation, it typically also adds costs to doing business, and that can very well work as a disincentive. Exhortation and appealing to the charitable instincts of businesses doesn't really work either, because businesses, as we know, are not charities. And then you have blended finance, you have these kind of ways of working together, public-private partnerships, risk mitigation. That works to a degree. But the question is whether it works enough at a large enough scale to really to push places like sub-Saharan Africa over the 2030 threshold. My takeaway from the last 3 days here at the UN, the discussions that I've been following, such as after many other discussions I've been following on this topic, is that really the only thing that can move the needle enough is that's market forces. Businesses will be moved by market forces. The question, of course, is what are the market forces? The market forces are, of course, all the small and large investors that make decisions based on rational parameters of the business environment. They are employees who demand of their employers that they follow certain value, that they follow certain corporate behavior. It's, of course, also all of us as consumers. We are a market force, and it's us as voters, at least in democracies. And in all of these categories, it's the millennials that are really behind this push of impact. However, all these market forces really can only wield their power if they have perfect information, if they can make informed decisions about corporate behavior, if they have full transparency. They need to know about the impact that the businesses where they are employed, or the businesses in which they invest, what impact they have. We all know, of course, that to measure impact is not that easy. There's many efforts that have been done, and we are getting better at it. But of course, it's not easy, but neither is assessing risk easy for a business. And we have been doing this for 100 years. We have included risk analysis in our business decisions. And if we can do that for risk, we can certainly do it also for impact. We definitely need to sharpen our tools to measure social and environmental impact in private sector activities. And then, of course, relentlessly demand that the impact is being reported and then transparently disclosed by the businesses, so that, again, the market forces can do their thing. So my plea today is, let's get serious about measuring impact and let the millennials do the rest.
How many in the room are millennials? Okay, all right, that's good. The rest of us can go along with it. Thank you all for your welcoming remarks and for support. speaker. So I'd like to ask Jeff Mulligan to join me at the front of the room. He's the Chief Executive of Nesta and has been so since 2011. Nesta is the UK's innovation foundation and runs a wide range of activities in investment, practical innovation, and research. Between 1997 and 2004, Jeff also had various roles in the UK government, including Director of the Government Strategy Unit and Head of Policy in the Prime Minister's office. For that, he held positions as Chief Executive of the Young Foundation and also was a reporter on BBC TV and radio. So maybe he looks familiar from that time as well. So, Jeff, welcome. Will you be helping Jeff this slide? Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
okay.
It's
Inspired by Mara, I just sort of torn up my speech, and we'll try and sort of improvise some thoughts really to spark up the conversation. I was going to start off, actually the slide is now gone, by saying a word about the 3 countries who are sponsoring this, and in a way they're too humble perhaps to sort of share some of the implications of their history for this topic. So perhaps to start with Finland. And I have the honour to be on the advisory committee for the Finnish Innovation Foundation. And it is an extraordinary story what's happened in the last 30 years in Finland. Since a deep economic crisis in the early 90s, Finland has moved on the one hand to become one of the world's biggest funders of R&D. I think it's going to be 4% of GDP going on science R&D, but at the same time cultivating an extraordinary startup scene, including in your saunas, where lots of the deals are made. So in a sense, creating the ecosystem at multiple levels, Finland has become a real champion. Switzerland comes top in the global innovation rankings, produced each year by INSEAD. And again, it's an ecosystem. You have extraordinary strength and depth in your human capital system, far better than ours in the UK. You have fantastic universities, fantastic firms in fields like pharma, and all with this extraordinary decentralized governance system, where you rotate your prime minister every year, which maybe some countries should do. Well, let's copy you on that. Maybe that would help bring in a little bit of new ideas. And then Germany, we think of Germany as this incredible innovation powerhouse, and it is, but we often forget that in the late 19th century, Germany was really worried it was falling behind the US and the UK and other countries, and had probably the most deliberate attempt ever in history to create an innovation ecosystem. A whole network of technology transfer institutes, training systems, and encouraging capital flows into their Mittelstand and larger firms. And that was the foundation then for 100 years of extraordinary success. So we have in these countries, in some ways a very important lesson for innovation, is however many creative people you have, and everywhere is full of creatives, even people who are older than millennials can occasionally be creative. But if it doesn't have institutional form, if it isn't backed by capital flows, it dissipates. And in a way, the lesson of the last 100 years is the global science system grew up from a base of lots of individual amateur scientists into systematic labs, R&D spending, and so on, which gave us many of the advances the last century. Business innovation is supported too by structures and systems and public sector support through incentives for venture capital, R&D tax credits, and the massive investment in basic research, which in a country like the US, underpins the business creativity. 40% of the underlying investment in Silicon Valley was public investment, then allowing market forces to play their part. Now, against that backdrop, the irony is you look at the SDGs, there's been nothing remotely comparable in terms of systematic orchestration of innovation. There haven't been the flows of capital, there haven't been the labs, there hasn't been the systems, and that's why, in a way, we've made, despite the great success of the MDGs, probably less progress in these things than we could have done. You mentioned drones. They are a classic example. Huge investment by the military in drones, followed by investment by business in how to use drones to deliver Amazon packages, but only very belatedly thinking about what drones could do for humanitarian relief or disasters, or as in Rwanda, for delivering medical supplies. And that's because we didn't have the system there to encourage that to happen. So what I thought I'd do is just say a minute or two each on some of the elements, I think, of a new emergent innovation system around SDGs. And I'll also try and say why I think these are quite challenging for governments and bureaucracies. Each one of the things I'm going to describe is not really a habit of bureaucracy. And I've worked much of my life in big bureaucracies, so I share this from experience as well as observation. The first is visibility. I think we're at a moment when an extraordinary amount of innovation is being driven by the possibility of making things visible, which used to be invisible. And this makes this an incredibly exciting time. It may be satellite imagery, observing deforestation patterns, or what's actually happening to the economy. It may be the data being collected by a mobile phone company in Lesotho or Swaziland. Or it may be data being generated by citizens about their own experiences, like the flooding project in Indonesia, which UNDP's been involved in. And some of the visibility is quite surprising. I was hearing just 2 days ago about the mayor in Indonesia who'd moved his city from having the worst public sector to the best. And he did that partly by requiring every public employee to post a picture at 4 o'clock each day showing what they'd been doing for the day. And many of them were not actually working at all. And it was the simplest way of flushing out an enormous amount of wastage in the bureaucracy and low-level corruption, just mobilizing visibility as a force for innovation. I think many of the things we were talking about will have some element of making visible what was invisible. The second big shift I think we're seeing is a new way of thinking about harvesting, not just in the food sense, but in a way it's turning this around. It's making organizations hungry, habitually hungry, to harvest ideas, insights from wherever they may be. We do a bit of this at Nesta through our Challenge Prize Center, which, like others, posts challenges and then encourages anyone anywhere to come up with a solution. So, for example, data-driven farming in Nepal, trying to orchestrate innovators right across the world who could show how you could use that data to improve livelihoods for farmers, and then linking them up with the farmers to turn those into useful solutions. Here in the US, NASA's a really interesting example, which 40 years ago, Moonshots, your title, NASA did most of its thinking inside NASA, but they've turned that inside out to a whole host of crowdsourcing methods which try and tap into other people's ideas on how to write software or design a spacesuit or even to make corporate videos. And it's a complete mindset shift when you assume that there's more creativity outside your walls than inside your walls. And I say this is uncomfortable for many bureaucracies, but it's hugely liberating once you put in place the systems and processes for constantly harvesting the best solutions, the best ideas, and in particular, in the case of SDGs, from people on the ground, from communities, from people experiencing extreme poverty, who often will have more insights into the solutions they need than someone in New York or London or anywhere else. So that there's a deep sort of moral principle about shifting to harvesting, as well as a practical one. There's then, as we heard, the challenge of mobilizing investment. The world has enormous investment flows, but not many of them go to social innovation and social entrepreneurship. And I think we're beginning to see in some countries what a mature ecosystem looks like, where you have easy access to microcredit for the very sort of small micro entrepreneur, perhaps selling stuff on the streets of a capital city, through small sums for the social entrepreneur with the germs of an idea who just needs to be able to show it, to test it out, through to the capital you need at each stage of scaling, and then right at the end, some of the outcome-based funding tools like development impact bonds and so on, which provide the pull-through for scaling. And those are each quite distinct kinds of capital. In most countries, they don't exist. They certainly don't exist as an ecosystem where you as the entrepreneur can see the capital you can get at each stage. But we're beginning to get there. In countries like India and Bangladesh, it's extraordinary how far they've gone in terms of the maturity of that investment ecosystem. The fourth part of this challenge, and again mentioned by several of the speakers, is really about how, in relation to all of these, can you anticipate technological change? As I mentioned in relation to drones, in many ways, civil society and even the public sector gets technologies late, designed for other purposes, and does very little to shape their development. And yet huge sums are being spent on R&D, not just 4% in Finland, but in many other countries across the world. And I think the more we can shift that spend, not just from prestige projects and from just purely hardware-driven projects, to actually bending AI, drones, etc., to the SDGs, there's a huge payoff. And in the case of AI, it's extraordinary how over 50 years of investment in AI, again, so much of that was driven by military priorities and then commercial priorities, how to get a better recommendation tool for YouTube. And it's only very recently we've started getting the beginnings of an AI for good field, talking about how to use these for healthcare in sub-Saharan Africa or to help education and so on. And it's as if the world's brain power was directed to the wrong places, not to the things where they were really needed, let alone the needs of the very poorest. And I hope the UN agencies can be really sort of champions for directing the brightest minds of the world and the brightest technologies to the most acute needs. And at the moment, they're not. At the moment, a lot of those brightest minds are essentially directed to fairly trivial tasks on social media platforms or in finance or marketing, not to where they're really needed. And yet there's a huge payoff there. And finally, as Mar said, I think we're beginning to come into an era when quite different models are possible for development than 5, 10, 15 years ago, and for the SDGs. And that can loosely be labeled collective intelligence, and that's why it's very exciting that these new labs are using the language of collective intelligence. And let me explain what I think that means. I mean, take any of these, but let's take some clean water and sanitation. I think what the collective intelligence approach says, if you've got a city like, let's say, Mumbai, try and rethink its whole system of clean water through a collective intelligence lens. That means thinking of all the sources of data which may be relevant to understanding how it's working, what's needed, and so on. Some of it will be formal data, some will be probably owned by business, some can be generated by citizens from their own experience. But do that systematically, curate it, organize it. Then, in terms of solutions, again, mobilize the brain power of people who have ideas. And again, using Mumbai as an example, what the Indian Railways did earlier this year, encouraging their 2 million staff to come up with ideas on how the railways could be run better, track maintenance, timetabling, and so on, was tapping into an otherwise completely wasted asset, the insights of sort of employees. But in the case of water, there'll be huge insights probably thrown away, wasted in communities themselves. And then a collective intelligence model, so harvest the best of those ideas, experiments with them, tries them out, and then brings in capital to scale the best. And I think that links very much to what was said about experiment. I think key to this sort of next era of innovation in development is really embedding an experimental ethos in pretty much everything. Bureaucracies and governments tend to think they know the answer to everything, but amazingly they don't usually. And it's often quite good to start with a humility which assumes that your preferred idea may not be the best one, and to try it out. And it's fascinating to see many governments around the world, including Finland, UAE, Canada, and others, moving to sort of saying experimentalism is just good in principle. Try things out fast and small before you take them to scale and waste large sums of money. So we heard from the ITC about entrepreneurship. At Nesta, we run a network called the Innovation Growth Lab, which tries out methods of supporting growing businesses and entrepreneurs. We have about 12 governments pool their money to do it. And the very simple idea there is you try out one method of backing millennial entrepreneurs, maybe coaching or mentoring or subsidies or whatever, but you keep a control group. And you then see after 1 year, 2, 3 years, who's grown most. It's incredibly simple. It's applying the basic scientific method to public policy, but it's very, very rare. And because it's rare, the hundreds of billions of dollars, euros, and so on spent on business supported each year, very few people know which of those billions actually works and which don't. So the experimental method, the humility it involves, the willingness to discover and learn is key, I think, to a smarter sort of system around SDGs. And in a way, that's the very sort of final point, I'd say. I think it's a real paradox of the age of Google, that it feels as if you can just sort of Google anything and find, the best evidence, the best example, what works. But in practice, it's much, much harder. And in practice, most people in most development projects and most governments around the world are not acting with the best available knowledge about what works and what doesn't. So there is a hugely important task of orchestrating, curating that knowledge and making it accessible to the people on the front line living very busy, pressed lives. They will not be able to Google to find out exactly what is the best tool, again, on clean water and sanitation, which fits their context, their reality. And there's the beginnings of projects on many of these to try and solve that problem, but they're still underinvested and under-curated. So very, very final point. How many of you are economists? Not very many, wow. Okay. So modern economics assumes that about 80% of productivity growth comes from innovation, new knowledge and its application. And that insight drives policies all over the world to invest in R&D, in incentives for venture capital, and so on. I think we shouldn't be surprised exactly the same applies to things like SDGs. Probably 80% of progress in all of these will ultimately come from innovation, that's to say new knowledge and its effective application. And I think the key test is, can we do something equivalent to what happened in the first half of the 20th century, when huge flows of both private capital and public money went into the science system, as it were, to generate innovation in hardware, lighting, computers, aerospace, pharma. Can we do something equivalent on the sort of social innovations, things you were talking about, which at the moment are very starved of money, very fragmented, very under-organized and under-supported. And I think in so many of these fields, that's where the biggest payoffs will come now. Yes, we still need to be investing in the hardware, the science and so on, but let's combine that with investment in social creativity, social innovation and social imagination. And your network of accelerator labs are an extraordinary opportunity to really achieve a step change in that at a very moment when, by good luck, we have at our disposal the extraordinary tools of data, AI and so on to help us. So good luck.
I'm actually going to mix things up a little bit. You may never invite me again. I'm actually going to take one or two questions from the floor for Jeff before we go into interventions from our practitioners. Is there anybody who would like to direct a question specifically for Jeff based on his keynote at this point, or a comment? Yes? Would you mind standing up and just introducing yourself, because there's no mic, so just to make sure.
Hi, my name is Talia Rahman, and with Goldman Sachs. I'm interested in social impact and impact investing. That's why I'm here. I'm curious of the 4 courses that you mentioned around innovation, which would you consider the lowest hanging fruit, and which one is challenging?
The lowest hanging fruit, well, in some ways, I think just shifting to a harvesting approach often delivers results very, very quickly. Because in most systems, and tell me if I'm wrong, and obviously you NDP colleagues are about to hear from are at the forefront of sort of acting on this, but in most places and most systems do not harvest the creative ideas, the brain power, the entrepreneurship around them. Because power is concentrated within government bureaucracies, big banks, others who just don't have those habits. So I think that's the lowest hanging fruit. But your sector is maybe the biggest hanging fruit, because You know, we have such huge flows of capital, and especially at the moment, in some ways, you know, too much capital looking for products. The growth of the impact investment field in some ways has been a really good story of trying to find social, environmental and other goals, linking them to investment. But I think the whole field needs to become much more serious and much more rigorous. There's a slight risk that impact is sort of sprayed on as a rather vague word, managed much less rigorously than you manage, you know, your margins and your return. So it's a challenge to the financial world is, can you be as rigorous and serious on the impact side of the equation as you always are on the financial side of the equation? And that hasn't happened yet, but it could happen in the next 5 years if there's courage of leadership at people like you. Is that unfair?
We put everything on the millennials already. So
Okay.
I think we can spread it out a little bit. Anyone else with a question for John?
I just wanted to follow up on your comments. It does cost to be very rigorous. So I wanted to know if you had any suggestions on how entrepreneurs can the way that fits with their
Yeah, this is something we grapple with a lot in projects. How do you not have disproportionate overheads of measuring everything and reporting everything? And if you're a small, you know, social enterprise, that's a complete nightmare if you spend all your time. So there's a whole set of issues about making sure that is proportionate to the scale of activity. There's a set of issues about proportionate to the stage of activity. So if something is very early stage and experimental, you probably shouldn't be spending too much money on evaluation assessment. But once it's getting to scale, then I think it is necessary to invest, and even more necessary to invest your measurement and assessment in ways which generate knowledge for other people in the field. And that's what still doesn't happen often enough. And one of the things which we've worked on, which may sort of horrify some of the purists in the room, but is very sort of rough and ready experimental tools. So you don't have to do a formal randomized controlled trial with all singing and dancing. And there are ways of doing, you know, rough and ready versions for almost no cost with a control group, which generate almost as much insight. And it's that kind of frugal methods used for frugal innovation, I suspect, is where we need to go. And sometimes the academy, the universities, are a little bit heavy-handed on this.
So much. Definitely something we're observing as well at UNICEF, where we invest in startups, and actually find that we often find companies that either overemphasize the financial sustainability at the cost of being true to some of the impact goals they have, or come to us with great ideas that have a very lofty impact goal, but really have not thought through where the money is going to come from and what the revenue strategies are. And so I think that's always a bit, at the moment, unfortunately, we still see a lot of companies grappling with that trade-off and, you know, what strategy and how to combine the two. So thank you very much, Jeff, for your keynote. We're going to move on now to hearing some of the concrete examples of practitioners and maybe how they've overcome some of the 4 challenges that Jeff outlined today. And all of these have been supported by Accelerate 2030. So we'll hear a little bit more about the program as well. And for now, I'm going to ask Santu Bertios to come up. She's the co-founder of Impact Hub Geneva and the strategic lead of the global Accelerate 2030 program. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. So I'm gonna be very honest that since we started this program, there's been a tension inside of me. So Accelerate 2030 has a focus on scaling the impact of solutions, innovative, impactful solutions for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in supporting entrepreneurs with the networks, resources, and tools to scale. A tension that I've had since the beginning has been, okay, so we're talking about scale, we're talking about growth, we're talking about, you know, how can we have more impact? Yet, on a personal level, there's been the tension that some of these issues, the paradigm we're currently working in is this fact of constant growth. The economy needs constant growth, and it's based on a model that essentially is the major problem of our world, which has led to resources being depleted us, burnouts and a constant stress of having to have, more profits, but also occasionally more impact. The systems we're working with are similar. And so for us, then there's not a real answer to what is the new paradigm shift and what we are moving with how do we enter into what is sustainable growth? Not just for the individual, the entrepreneur, the organization itself, but also for society. And this is us going into a paradigm shift of what is the future where we move towards. And for this, exploring these topics, we need safe spaces. We need exploration, just like Jeff was saying. Like we need places where we can come together and explore. How do we move forward? What are the new paradigm shifts? What are our new models of working? How do we access different type of information and different forms of collaboration? And with that said, that's why I'm honored to be part of the Impact Hub network, because that's what we really are providing. The Impact Hub network is currently a network of over 100 impact hubs across the world. We offer innovation spaces where we can come together to test and explore new methodologies, new models, and where we support entrepreneurs, innovators, and these new forms of collaboration. And to date, like I said, in just a few years, the Impact Hub started with one Impact Hub and spread in just 10 years across over 50 countries, 5 continents, 100 locations. And it's this kind of like model of emergence and this working in networks that is an amazing development that we see today. We want to leverage the fact that we are a global network, and myself, I'm a founder of the Impact Hub in Geneva, and I'm joined by a couple of co-founders here as well. We want to leverage the fact that we have these global partners on the ground, the UN. Our partners are also here today, Pfizer, ITC, and others, that also has global networks that we can think of scale, and we can think of new models on how to collaborate. And therefore, Accelerate 2030 is our program that we put together that has now been, as mentioned, in over 19 countries, supporting ventures. So what we are doing is we are identifying entrepreneurs in each location are chosen on their model of having a scalable innovation, having their impact on the Sustainable Development Goals, and also thirdly, and very important, their persons, their teams, their strengths as a team. And we support them in each location through a 6-month acceleration program, where we're bringing them support to access to finance, scaling models, connecting them with key partners, support through expert support with Boston Consulting Group, Accenture, a lot of other partners. But also going back to what I just talked about, one of our key elements of the program is also around leadership and resilience. What does really sustainability mean? What is right sustainable growth for you? And where do what are you happy with? What type of impact that you want to create in the world? So we developed this program. We have our core element of the program is that we're partnering with organizations. So we have over 14 partners today, and happy that many of them are in the room here. Some of our partners are right here. And so we're working with partners, private sector, with government, with entrepreneurial networks, with investors, investor communities, and connecting them with the entrepreneurs for them to support scale and how to work at scale. With this said, I don't want to take more room because the key people are right here today, and they're the ones, and they are the examples to show what are some of these solutions. And I'm just really honored and very humbled to have you guys here in the room and to come and share your stories. And also big thanks to some of the partners here I already mentioned, UNDP, ITC, the Swiss government. Am I missing somebody? And the Impact Hub network as well. So thank you all, and please welcome the entrepreneurs here who are the real doers tackling the SDGs every day. Thank you very much.
And maybe we're not speaking to take a seat or So we have Accelerate 2030 finalists. Come on up. Yeah, come on up. Take a seat. From Turkey, from Mexico, Rwanda, and the Philippines, who are going to share a bit of their experiences today. I'm going to ask all five to start. Do we have enough chairs? Trying to gain a little bit of time so we don't all switch up. Great. All right, over to you. I'm going to give you a sign at 1 minute, okay? I'm sure you're used to 5-minute pitching.
Hello everyone. First of all, thank you for all being here and for the remarks, because as a 30 years old entrepreneur, it was good to hear all the perspectives here from you. And it's really valuable for us to come in UN and UNDC sessions to see the broader vision of the world. So my name is Olcay. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pulsar Plus. So what we do, we are saying that we recover the best value out of surplus for the businesses, for the society, for the environment. So at 2015, just seeing the launch of SDGs from the United Nations, I was so inspired and I said, I need to take an action. So I choose these targets climate action first. I started thinking on, then it came to zero hunger and responsible consumption and production. So what can I do? I thought that I know there's a problem with food waste, and can I do something using technology in a scalable way to tackle these SDGs? So this is how it started. And I took the big vision for the company to halve the carbon dioxide emission coming from the food waste, which is 12.3 now exactly in the SDG. Then trying to learn and reading the details, seeing the problems in real time, expertise talks, I came to the point that there is the food recovery hierarchy in the literature, and no one uses it in a proper way globally. Looking at the reason, I saw that actually there needs to be a lot of partners, that companies and governments and NGOs work together. There should be an ecosystem, but it's really hard to manage this in that way, and it's really hard to scale till 2030. So we said, using the platform, can we provide all solutions for each layers in one shop platform, enabling companies either resell their surplus at a discounted price, or if they cannot donate to the charity, send it as a recycle to biogas, and maybe sell the raw material for as a circular economy to another company. So then, also using all these transactions, there's a big data that was not there. So we started to collect and store the data and analyze, and we give real-time data analytics and dashboards to companies, actually how they can make better planning to save waste in the source. So this is how it started. And as a result, we can go to the other one, the last one. As a result, we create a huge ecosystem in the platform, and still actually we are creating. And within the ecosystem, there are the HoReCa, the hotel, restaurants, caterings, retailers, animal feed manufacturing companies, agriculture, food science, and all. So it's a matrix of very complex issue. And the future is there in the ecosystems built on digital platforms, I think. Within 18 months, we saved 2,600 tons of food already, and which is equivalent of a dinner for 8 million people at once. So, we are operating in Turkey at 25 cities and on the verge of expanding the business to Europe. We are looking to expand to first Germany and for Nordic countries as well. We are trying to find the right tools for us. But coming to the other parts, what can be done from other parts, like not the entrepreneur side, there are also governmental issues that needs to be helping entrepreneurs. So in Turkey, we took the responsibility. I went to parliament. I told them the problems, because actually the regulations were preventing companies to donate, because if they donate, they lose VAT. So they pay more VAT if they donate. So we proposed to change it, and we changed it. So now there's a big incentive. So there are a number of things that should be changed also. This is why the government and the NGOs should listen more to entrepreneurs who are trying to change the system. So this is a big know-how at the bottom. And the other point, I couldn't agree more to you about this finance and voting question. The thing is, you see these SDGs, and you heard from Santu, usually in developing countries, the actions should be taken, of course in developed countries as well. But the problem is, we don't have the tools to go these financings in developing countries. So I sometimes ask the question, there are billions of fundings globally talked about the impact investing, and I asked, who got this money? Because we don't. Please give it. So this is a usual problem of the tours in developing countries of these problems. So we always have the pressure to go as soon as go to the break even, survive. We are always in survival mode because even finding 100,000 euros is a big deal. So in developing countries, so this I think should be considered seriously if you want to solve the problem. It's just a small thing I think for global perspective, very small numbers, but making a difference. Thank you.
I'm assuming you're sitting in the right order.
Yeah.
With that, the CEO of HM Energy Mexico.
Hello, thank you for having us. We're very glad to be here, accelerate on the UN program people. I am Israel Magañas from HM Energy Mexico. We are converting pollution into a solution. So what's the problem we realize there is? Well, there's no more time to lose as we see it. 1.35 billion tires are discarded every single year in the world. Only 9% of this amount is recycled. It's a huge problem. It's not only a recycling problem, it is also a health problem. Because as you know, there's many mosquitoes that are generated because of this. Zika, dengue, chikungunya viruses are developed in these developing countries all over the world because of these tires that are discarded. And the other thing is, obviously, as we know, global warming. It's the great challenge of our generation. So we were together and started thinking, how can we solve all these things? We have a little bit of experience in terms of hydrocarbons, all hydrocarbons, and recycle them, and we came up with a solution. Our solution converts the waste tires with a conversion module into 3 different products. Substitute diesel that generates 35% less CO2 emission than its counterpart. Substitute carbon black that generates 98% less CO2 emissions than its counterpart. And recycled steel that generates 98% less CO2 emission than its counterpart. So basically it's a solution that takes back all tires that are waste and takes it back to the original form of the tires. So the current impacts related to the SDGs. Right now, we have a current impact of generating 3 million liters of green fuel, which is obviously, we call it green because it generates 35% less CO2 than its counterparts. We also are avoiding 76,000 tons of CO2 equivalent every single year with 2 plants that we are generating currently. And we are saving 3.4 million trees of being cut. So it's basically the equivalent of many times Central Park here in New York. And we have shifted Mexico's tire recycling rate from 9 to 13% only because of the 2 plants that we are currently operating. And we are destroying every single year 740,000 tires in Mexico. In terms of, well, that's my presentation. In terms of the questions that there were asked, I, as OJ say, I could not agree more with all the points that are being said here. I think we all agree that the entrepreneurs are trying to get the money from the banks, and the banks are not giving the money, right? I can see the point in the banks because they need the right systems, and for us entrepreneurs to create the right system for them to report, right? But also I think very important, as you mentioned, is that we get more rigorous in the impact reporting as the way we do with financial reporting. Because many companies can say they have impact, but to have real impact and live it every day and see these kinds of numbers, I think that is the impact that can actually move the needle to change the world. So my name is Israel, and let's convert pollution to a solution.
Hey guys, I'm Nash. I'm the something's happening here. I'm the co-founder of Safe Motos. There's so many things I want to say. I've got to say it was really inspiring listening to you guys speak. But I have exactly 3 minutes, and I'm seeing them making signs, so I'm going to be succinct and on time. Again, I'm Nash because that's the start of my pitch. I'm the co-founder of Safe Motos. Safe Motos is a safer Uber for African motorcycle taxis. I've been living in sub-Saharan Africa for more than 10 years now, and over many beers with my co-founder Peter, after taking motorcycle taxis in Kigali to get around, we sit down and, over a drink go, well, that driver almost killed me. We started over more beers, having ideas what we could do over this. I had this idea of filling up the helmet with a bunch of sensors. Peter had the idea of just using smartphones, because smartphones have sensors. Paired with the Uber-style interface, got into a startup accelerator, we're off to the races. Been pretty cool. We've done 350,000 safe trips in Kigali. Perfect. We've had actually quite good growth rate in different segments, and we've been able to never have any of our passengers be in an accident serious enough to actually have to go to hospitalization. However, this isn't what I want to talk about. What I actually want to talk about is why entrepreneurs are an effective way of having an impact on SDGs and development and change. What's interesting is not what we've done, but the way we've actually iterated our lesson learning process. What we're currently doing is incorporating the lessons learned over the course of doing an Uber for African motorcycle taxis. Two major things came up in the process of our journey that we never expected. One is we didn't realize actually the way new technology users engage with technology. New technology users do not come from Windows 95 to XP to Vista to 7 to 8 to 10. They don't know that an X means close. They don't know that a user flow goes from left to right. They don't know that a map has north at the top or that you squeeze to zoom out. We needed to design a new user experience and able to actually incorporate users, of which I think that my co-founder Peter and myself are the best in the world. We also realized that motorcycle taxis, yeah, I know it's crazy. It's not like there's a lot of competition, right? Yeah, tell my mother. What we also realized was we were using motorcycle taxis, but motorcycle taxis are just one tool of delivery. What we can also do is deliver food. We can deliver supermarket goods. We're also going to deliver what we call on-demand professional services, barbers, electricians, plumbers. If you've been in a developing world city, there's no yellow pages. We're able to be an aggregator of quality and conveniently bring it to your house. We're currently in the process of expanding into Kinshasa, Africa's third largest city, and we will also, to brag, be the largest technology company in Africa, but also to be humble, because it's completely blue ocean. Fifth, there's been a lot of progress and recognition of what we've done. I didn't know what an SDG was before Accelerate 2030. I won't tell you what I thought it was. But to move on. Don't tell my mother. But really, I was really inspired. Honorable Assistant Secretary General, something like this. Sorry. What I was really inspired by was what you were saying about asymptotes. And there was an interview today that they were asking us, do we think we're going to achieve the 2030 development goals by 2030? What I can say is we're not going to achieve them linearly. We're going to achieve them asymptotically. And the question shouldn't be, do we hit it at 2030? But what is the rate of ascent? We are a moonshot at my company. I have no idea if it'll work. We just finished a funding round. What I will say is if we're a successful moonshot, then please give us money so we can accelerate.
We'll be collecting checks after. Next up, Rafael.
Hello, friends. Good afternoon. My name is Rafael. I'm from Manila, Philippines. I'm the co-founder and CFO of Salt Sustainable Lighting. We developed a system that uses salt and water as a medium to generate electricity. Our first product of the land. And we developed this with people at the bottom of the pyramid in mind, people who don't have access to electricity, people who use firewood, who use candles, who use fuel-based lanterns as their primary source of lighting, people who never had fast food their lives. We developed this system using that, and in my country alone, there's 16 million of those people. In the whole world, 1.2 billion people. And like with partnerships and with programs like Accelerate 2030 and other stakeholders, in the last year, we were able to deploy 5,000 units to communities all over the Philippines. And along the way, aside from giving them light, we also give them the ability to save money. They don't have to buy fuel anymore. They don't have to buy candles anymore. Help them save money of up to $200 every year. And to them, it's money they can use to buy food, buy medicine, afford better education for their children. And also we help reduce specific respiratory diseases for kids especially. And yeah, so it's a short presentation, so there you guys have it. If you want more information, you can check our website. You can also send us an email. We're also on Facebook. Like moving forward, we're looking for more partners to amplify our impact inside or outside the country. And before I end, I'd just like to thank everyone. There's a reason why you're here in this room. I'd like to thank everyone for fighting with me.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nick Blocker, and I'm the CEO of the Eurex Group. We're an innovative digital health startup company, so the only health company from the group. We specialize in the development of mobile and disruptive audiometric technology. Imagine how different your life would be if you could not hear. Healthy hearing is what connects us to the world around us, to people, in relationships, and to life. According to the WHO, 5.3% of the world's population suffer from permanent disabling. That's just over 460 million people globally. Did you know that 1 in 4 people over the age of 45 and 1 in 3 over the age of 65 suffer from permanent disabling hearing loss? And that's why we developed a suite of hearing products. With our 12 products, we have set the aim to revolutionize access to hearing healthcare. One of them are the National Hearing Test of the United States, which will be launching in a few weeks. Another one, HearScreen, the world's first clinically validated hearing screening solution that can be used by untrained people. Or our smartphone-based otoscope, which uses artificial intelligence to diagnose 5 of the most common ear conditions. To date, we have screened more than 255,000 people across 30,000 cities and have trained more than 25,000 people. And in the process, we've created more than 64 jobs. Our products are currently being used in more than 25 countries globally. It's your country on the map. Hearing is the gateway to healthy learning, and we know that early intervention is required for successful education. But why is still less than 5% of kids globally being screened for hearing impairments? Especially with technologies of ours, which actually makes it possible for countries and governments to deploy decentralized hearing healthcare services. But then I beg the question, isn't it our responsibility then to advocate for these services? Thank you very much.
Before we move to our final speaker and open up for questions, I have a question to the 5 entrepreneurs. I'm going to take funding off the table as a possible answer to my question. We heard a lot about the needs for exponential growth to keep up with the trends that are affecting us and causing a lot of the challenges that are preventing us from reaching the SDGs. From where you are now, if you thought out to when your company is going to achieve exponential growth, what is the one thing in the ecosystem that would help you get to that point? Funding is not an answer, because we all know that that's an essential part. depending on the stage that you're at. But what is, if you look at your respective ecosystem, in the country that you're active in, what is the one thing that if you could change it, it would accelerate you significantly? Go ahead.
I think regulation. For us in Mexico, regulated because, I mean, it makes sense because Mexico, Pemex, Petróleos Mexicanos is a state-owned company that manages all the oil soil. So because we produce a hydrocarbon product, it's normal that the state has to regulate that. But if we could find a way to deregulate a little bit more, we could find a very good way to grow faster. Because, for example, for us to have the permits to start operating, we had to wait for 24 months. So obviously, that's not exponential at all.
Okay, go ahead.
So the same, I was going to say regulation again. From food-based perspective, there are two things. First of all, there is not globally, the problem is the same, but there is no global unified or aligned regulation among countries. Each has different regulations, which prevents us to scale from country to country. And the second thing, for instance, in my country, just an example, it is cheaper to landfill than recycle. And there is no regulation tracking this. And there is the so-called waste tax, which is not calculated according to the volume of your waste, but rather according to the common revenue of your company. So there is no regulation indeed. It's just on paper, just to get some money that is not being tracked in every operation. So if governments can get aligned and get really good regulations on the ground, then we can scale faster.
I'd say two things. One is access to qualified human resource. Quite often when you're doing a startup in the developing world, people expect things to be cheaper because expenses are cheaper. But a good software developer is expensive anywhere in the world. And usually actually have to pay kind of like a hazard, whatever that thing is, to get them into the region. The other thing that's maybe more applicable to people in this room is simplified access to good research databases and studies. No offense, guys, but the studies you put out are 1,000 pages, and there's been no census done in Congo or Kinshasa since 1986. That makes it extremely hard to actually make informed decisions. And investors and things love data. They want to know, what type of shoes are people wearing in this, this 1 kilometer square. And we can't even say if that 1 kilometer square has, 1 car or 10,000 cars.
I come from a health perspective and talk about South African context. So in 2012, our government implemented the integrated school health policy, which dictates that all school-going children in South Africa should have the hearing screen. Now, there's about 3.2 million kids entering the schooling system in South Africa every year. Now, guess how many of those kids are actually being screened? I alluded to that in my presentation. Less than 5%. So I always beg the question and say, it's a policy that was implemented, in 2012. We are 5 years from the policy being implemented, and still yet nothing has been done. I've traveled around specifically in developing worlds, kind of looking at specifically school health policies for screening programs, and just realizing that we actually have a policy in South Africa was actually fantastic. I've been to so many countries where there's no school policy, which means that kids go to school. We don't know if they can see, if they can actually hear the teacher. So I think from our perspective, as well as creating awareness around specific disabilities, which includes health, hearing, and vision.
Yeah, for us, it's just open-mindedness from government, from bigger private organizations, into having a conversation with us, taking us seriously. They just need to be more open-minded.
One last question, I'm going to hand off to our final speaker. If you think back to the support that you've received so far, so it might be through Accelerate 2030, it might be through, I'm sure you have all interacted with a number of different accelerator and incubator programs, of which there are nowadays actually quite a few in the countries that you operate in, but also global ones. What was the key thing that you think made a difference in terms of the support that somebody else or program gave you? What was sort of the thing where you had either an aha moment before it sort of unlocked a big challenge that you were facing?
Like for us, it was clinching a partnership with a big manufacturing organization in the Philippines. That's something that we knew we had to do and we had to go through because of, like we were doing small batches before, but we were doing it manually. But if we want to grow the organization exponentially, we had to go through mass manufacturing, and like we didn't know how it worked. We don't know the process, and like the costs is too much for us. So we're just thankful that we met a local manufacturing company, took us under their umbrella, and showed us the way, and is now still helping us.
So yeah, we spoke about spoken to them about public-private partnerships. I think working sort of in the health sector, you work with local governments, and they're notoriously bad at just getting stuff off the ground. We've been about 3.5 years in the making of getting pilots underway, specifically in school programs in South Africa. And the real thing that kind of pivoted us was when we partnered up with a local telco, part of the Vodafone group in South Africa. And once we did that and kind of partnered up with a local telco, which had always had inroads into government, it was only the first time we could see traction from an implementation perspective in the health.
For me, like I feel that the most important enabling factor has often been something outside of my control, which is serendipity. And I do believe that there's ways to, disrupt serendipity, or at least make yourself more open to the world. But what I'd like to actually just say, specifically for this forum, is I think that the Accelerate 2030 platform is actually like an exceptional fabricator of serendipity. For the opportunity for myself and my colleagues to be here, I mean, I'm sure you can imagine what it means for the first time for all of us to speak at the United Nations Forum. I never predicted this. And I think to be able to have these linkages is something that the Accelerate 2030 program I feel privileged to have taken part of.
For us, is the visibility. The second plant that we are opening right now is based on a lot of the visibility that Accelerate 2030 gave us. So I think the people in this room have a lot of power over many people back in our countries. Because if we say, we're talking here in the UN, we went to Switzerland, we're doing this and that, we gain a lot of visibility and credibility. Or maybe sometimes we don't even need the money to come from here, but only the validation to come from here, and then we can go back home, sell that validation in order to get capital and start.
For that is a different. There is still a misunderstanding on that people think still in our country these things should not be solved via entrepreneurial approach, but rather should be only solved by NGOs. So then a couple of NGOs started a war against us. They said they said they are going to kill us. The business. So then we started to think more. We started to work harder. Actually, that was the aha moment that actually we started to scale fast. We started to scale all the solution set and everything. Then actually the momentum came and we got stronger and stronger. Actually, it was a more healing. So it helped us.
Thank you all. So really, I think what we heard today is the diversity of needs that entrepreneurs face, not just in their specific sectors, in their context, but also depending on what's already available in the ecosystem. So where at times, really, as you said, the visibility from outside can be that accelerating force. Sometimes it's government regulation, but in each case, what you mentioned was very different in terms of the regulation, that had to change. So what we're going to do finally for our wrap-up speaker is ask John to join us here. He's the catalyst of the African Innovation Policy Manifesto that mobilizes entrepreneurs to change the ecosystem locally towards what they need. So, it's all yours.
And funnily enough, I'm also founder of Impact. And we ran the Accelerate 2030 program in Rwanda last year, which is why you have the pleasure of this comedian and his colleague Peter here from Rwanda.
Thanks for the ticket, John.
Impact hubs and spaces like impact hubs that bring together citizens to solve their own problems incubate a lot more than just entrepreneurs. We incubate ideas, we incubate cultural change. One of those initiatives is, we're just talking about this I4Policy, I4Policy.org. We co-created last year the Africa Innovation Policy Manifesto with, at this moment, we have about 91 Innovation Hub managers that have signed the documents and a bunch of supporting organizations that represent, these spaces represent more than 450,000 people around the continent. And what this document is, it's providing a policy vision for policymakers to reform the regulatory environments to make it easier for these entrepreneurs to start their businesses. So that's what I do, that's why I'm here. And I have the pleasure to be here to provide some closing remarks for this really awesome session for Accelerate 2030, which is a wonderful program. And if any of you guys want to put some money into doing this longer next year, come talk to me afterwards. I want to go back and take up this, this challenge from the Honorable Assistant Secretary General around reinventing development. There is a saying from the Great Lakes region of Central Africa, which is that whatever is done for me but without me is done against me. Development is not about having other people give you things. It's in fact not about having anything. It's about the ability to choose your own life, to solve your own challenges, to create businesses. In fact, entrepreneurship is the ultimate personification of development, right? So when we talk about projects like this, the entrepreneurs up on the stage aren't beneficiaries, they're partners. And that's what's beautiful about a program like Accelerate 2030, is about enabling and finding new partners that are already solving these challenges. And so, one of the things that we've been doing in Rwanda, again, I mentioned this I4Policy project, is that we have been creating an opportunity for the entrepreneurs to get involved in public policy. Because in fact, the outcomes are better when the beneficiaries are involved in the actual construction of the solutions. Development over the years has gone through a variety of different trends. We started out with investing in infrastructure, moved to human capital development. 13 years ago, we would have been in this room talking about mutual accountability in the Paris Declaration. In fact, I see this new shift towards innovation and entrepreneurship as a huge opportunity for all of the organizations in this room, in the sense that it's not about providing solutions for people. It's about working with organizations, working with entrepreneurs to create solutions. And so, one of the things that I would like to leave everybody in the room with is that it's not about creating, for example, top-down solutions, like, for example, accelerator labs in countries that may already have incubation hubs or impact hubs or other community spaces. It's about finding people that are already working on solutions and partnering with them, like the entrepreneur. So I think that's pretty much, and I'm kind of threw that out there, but are there any questions, or is there any time for questions?
But maybe to all the speakers that we've heard from today, if there's anything from the floor, I'm really going to take just 2 or 3 and then we're going to wrap up because we're running a little bit out of time. I'm sure the speakers will be happy to chat with you after. Can you introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Ariel Rojas. I'm a social entrepreneur based here in New York. And we as individuals, as always, exceed in the way we challenge the system. But when it came for us to become a norm within the system, that's the more challenging part, because that means that the bureaucracy that is around systems get resistant to us as an agent of change. So my question is, how entrepreneurs can work with the Department of Education in each country so we can see solutions at a very early age and not wait for the crisis to happen, or for somebody that is well connected to really make sense of the innovations. So in a way, we collectively have social entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in general, how we can impact the way we educate the next generation of solutioners, let me put it that way. So in order to make that a norm and not an exception, not somebody well connected, not somebody with a lot of money, but somebody that want the next generation to think ahead of their time. Let's say people that are now 10, 15, and how we get them to think the same way those individuals, or we individuals, think in order to create solutions.
Thank you.
ask them how they are engaging in innovative partnerships in order to make scale. Understand that innovative partnerships are and also to activate their business model. Connecting to the government and also to civil society and one last question, anyone?
Just in terms of skills, what are key skills that you feel, maybe besides very concrete tech skills, that you feel younger people, millennials, whatever you want to call them, need to learn in order to create their own businesses, more from the skill side than the funding perspective, or but skills like what are the 21st century skills that you guys feel young people need to succeed?
Actually, Jeff, would you maybe like to answer the first question, which if I understand correctly was about how to really build up the entrepreneurial potential in young people very early on to create that mindset, and then maybe there's some experiences
Well, maybe just two comments. So one was that there was a mentor I had many years ago who was a very successful social entrepreneur and actually set up schools for social entrepreneurs. And he said the mark of the social entrepreneur is you take no as a question, not an answer. Everything you suggest, you'll face people saying no, and you take that as an energizing answer, energizing question rather than an answer. But he also said, actually, yes can be the most dangerous moment. Going back to what you said, that when you're being sort of incorporated, and you have to have the partnerships with the big manufacturer or the bank or the government, keep your grit. You know, your purpose in the system is to be the challengers and not to become sort of tamed or co-opted too quickly. And in a sense, that's what I think we need in education systems for young people, is from a very early age, having experience of doing, to my mind, it's project-based learning, doing real things, doing entrepreneurship in a school context where you're going out and selling stuff. That teaches you that willingness to take risks, to try things out, to challenge, but also probably the key skill, going back to your question, other than the technical skill, is the skill of being willing to listen to a user or a consumer and actually hear what they do or don't like about what you're doing for them, rather than thinking you've got the most fantastic solution. Can I make one other comment? Because one of the vices of not doing my proper address was I missed the key part on regulation, which I think is really important for the accelerator labs and this whole program. Because I think we are at a period when there's a great innovation in regulation possible, which will be key to the success or failure of many of these projects. We've called it anticipatory regulation, and if you're interested in published various things, mapping examples around the world, some of which essentially make it much easier for the entrepreneur to early on talk to the regulator. Sometimes it's in sandboxes, or there's a whole variety of methods for doing that. So you can be given a bit of what's experimental space to try out your idea and overcome the problem in many countries that the regulators only talk to very big, very established players, and even quite small regulations may block the innovative solutions, say in health or energy or transport. And there's a related movement to creating more experimental test beds for drones, AI, etc., or finance, which I think are going to be a key part of the ecosystem of innovation in the future. So yes, money, but also opening up that world of law, regulation, and so on, which often can be very stagnant and very uninnovative.
I'm going to take the liberty to select one of the questions that were asked because we're about to get kicked out of the room. Just ask the innovators for in one word, the key skill that you think young people should learn to prepare them for the 21st century and skills that they might need to be entrepreneurs. You take one each. What?
If we look at disruptive innovation,
I said one word. One word.
Double barrel word. Disruptive business models, they should learn.
Okay.
Yeah. Resilience.
We'll come back to you, shall we? Go ahead. Resilience.
For me, it's listening.
Listening skills. Great. And so sorry we didn't get to your question, but I feel we heard about 3 or 4 partnerships in the answers before, so maybe I can encourage you to talk to the entrepreneurs individually. So thank you all for coming. For all the speakers, I'm going to ask the colleagues from the Impact Hub to distribute those.
Yeah, maybe just before you all get up.
What I wanted to say is we heard a lot today about kind of diversity of needs, but also maybe not to leave things entirely to serendipity. I'm not sure I'm a firm believer in that. I don't think we can afford that, and also not only to the millennials. And we heard just about today to not become tame. Let's not become kind of servants to the institutions, but really continue to challenge them. A real challenge to myself and my colleagues within the UN. I think we try very hard, and it's not always the easiest place, but there are a lot of us who are trying our best, and we think are growing with support from the outside. So keep us honest, please. Remind us of what our role is to keep you innovative and keep our countries innovative. And let's try to scale the moonshots that you and others are developing for us. So thank you all for coming.
And maybe just thank you so much, Sunita, for having hosted us here today. Thank you all, speakers and entrepreneurs, for having also shared your experiences, your stories. I would like to highlight again a big thank you from the Impact Hub Network. For you speakers, there is chocolate, Swiss chocolate waiting for you, and impact reports. And so for one each for you. And if you would not run away, but actually or have someone who could stay with us, we have Impact Hub co-founders from Taiwan, from Sao Paulo, from Geneva, from Kigali, from New York City, from Venezuela, Caracas. Here in this room, we are interested to connect to you, to speak with you, how you approach innovation and entrepreneurship and building these ecosystems, to see maybe we can join forces at some point in the future. Thank you for being with us.